Hi everyone, welcome back to another video review. Today we're reviewing Scarlet Nexus, a game that I wasn't gonna play, but then Bandai Namco gifted a code to Geeks Have Game, a website that I do write for, and they gave it to me. So thank you, Travis. Thank you, Bandai Namco. And this is a official video review, but definitely check out the written review there because it has a lot more details and it's a lot more articulate because you know I'm bad at talking. Anyway, anything that you agree with me or disagree with me about my review, please, I want to know all the details in the comments. Like, if you gotta call me a dumb bitch, do what you gotta do. I want to hear your thoughts on the game, on my review, all of the above, so that I can make these better. You know what I mean? The reason why I was hesitant to play this game initially before getting the code, and why I'm generally hesitant to play any anime-styled RPGs, is because they all tend to feel the same, with very few differences. But the one thing that stood out to me about Scarlet Nexus when I saw the trailers for it is that it seemed to have silky smooth hack and slash combat, kind of like games that I adore, such as Astral Chain. And because it gave me so many Astral Chain vibes, I was like, alright, you know what, maybe this is worth trying, because I adored that game. It was like one of my favorite games that year that it came out. Was it 2019? I can't keep track of time anymore. I try, but I can't keep track of time. And when I first booted up Scarlet Nexus for the first few hours, I would say the first 5 or 6 hours, it definitely felt like a generic anime action RPG. Now that I've beaten the game and platinumed it, which requires you to beat it twice, I can totally see that this is a more unique experience than it presented itself to be. And keep in mind that the marketing and even the demo presented this game to be like a combat heavy game where the main draw to it is the silky smooth combat, but it's actually more of a storybook game. Kind of like a manga. This game is a manga with combat instead of being a cool action RPG with manga-like storytelling. The combat's actually just sprinkled in between the manga storybook-like sequences. Within the first few hours of the game, I felt this manga-styled storytelling was a bit lazy. I thought it was a way for Bandai Namco to avoid adding animated cutscenes. Kind of a complaint I had in Code Vein as well. And I so desperately wanted those cool animated cutscenes because 1, I like anime, and 2, the intro had really good animation, and I just would have loved if we saw more of the animation in the intro within certain cutscenes, especially action cutscenes. And after a few hours of playing the game, I thought about it and I was like, wait a minute, this is actually pretty creative to tell this story in a manga form. It's an anime game, makes total sense. And even the design of the manga pages, like the borders, seem purposefully done. Even though I learned to appreciate the manga-styled storytelling for dialogue sequences, it kind of took away from the action sequences. I kind of wish at least the action was fully animated. But I guess I'll have to wait for the Scarlet Nexus anime to get some well-animated action. Okay, so before I mentioned that you have to play the game twice to get the platinum, obviously you can just play the game once, but I do think that it's worth playing as both characters to get a full scope of the entire story and the world building. There's Yuito Sumeragi and Kasane Randall. Both of these characters have psychokinesis powers, but Yuito wields a sword and Kasane wields throwing knives. But more importantly, each of these characters have a different background that you'll get to read before you choose who you're gonna play as. So if you play as both characters, you'll get 2 different storylines, although in the end it's all kind of the same. It's still kind of a different perspective getting to that point. So you're not really forced to pick a character first, but I highly recommend that you play Yuito first because his story arc explains the complex world systems a lot better than Kasane's. Also, Yuito's combat style is a lot more traditional because you're playing with a sword instead of throwing knives. So let's talk a bit about this complex world because it's more dense than I imagined. Kasane and Yuito live in a world where humanity has developed psionic powers, but a mysterious threat called the Others feasts on human brains. A defense unit called OSF, standing for Other Suppression Force, is deployed to save humanity from this threat. Kasane, Yuito, and other Animu characters that you bond with throughout the game join the OSF and use their powers to save humanity. So you'll spend most of the game listening to dialogue in a manga-styled form. Through this heavy dialogue, you'll get to know other OSF members, you'll bond with them, you'll learn about the origin of the Others, you'll question the legitimacy of the government and how their actions actually helping humanity, and you'll even explore your own purpose in the world. The world building is super dense and complex, and you're also introduced to so many characters in the beginning. It was a bit of an information overload, and I got extremely overwhelmed. And because there were so many characters being introduced to me that I hadn't gotten to know, the dramatic moments that happened pretty early in the game felt way less impactful than they could have been if they would have happened a little bit later in the game when I got to know some of these characters. I gotta be honest with you, I didn't fully wrap my head around everything until my second playthrough with Yuito. But once I overcame being super overwhelmed and I started to have an understanding of the world and the characters, I started to appreciate this game's complexity. And because Scarlet Nexus falls into this common theme of 2021 where every form of media is exploring time and space travel, like Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart, Deathloop, Loki, WandaVision, Returnal, I thought things might get out of hand, but they didn't. My imagination just wandered a little too far. But perhaps the Scarlet Nexus anime might go further with exploring the complexities of time travel, or maybe even the sequel if we ever get one. So even though I was overwhelmed with how complex the world is, I'm actually really into it, and I kind of want to see where it goes, and probably would be more interested if it became even more complex than it is right now. So as I mentioned before, you're going to be spending a lot of time in dialogue getting to know all of these characters. There's a lot of characters. And because they initially present as cliche anime characters, it was kind of hard to connect to them. They didn't feel like they had any substance. But the game will encourage you to complete bond episodes where you'll be spending a lot of time. So the bond episodes are completely optional, but even after completing all of them, I still only really felt intrigued by characters who had a direct connection to the story or whose loyalty to me were a little bit questionable. The bond episodes for the rest of the characters that didn't have a connection to the story or to my character felt a bit lackluster because you're kind of just sitting there exploring their hobbies like gardening or cooking or something like that. I do think completing these bond episodes are worth it because they add more layers to the bigger picture of this story, but just keep in mind that it's going to take up a lot of your gameplay time. But it might be worth it to have a better understanding of the story and to feel more connected to the characters that are in your party. There's also a text message system called Brain Messages where you can chat with characters and activate more bond episodes. So the idea here is that you're getting a message transmitted directly from their brain to your brain. Seems like a cool concept, but also kind of freaky and weird. Slide into my BMs. Even though it's kind of a cool concept, this brain message text message system felt very redundant next to the dense dialogue. It's basically characters just repeating what happened during your bond episode or during your last mission. But initially it was kind of a helpful refresher to wrap my head around all the information that's being thrown at me, but later on it was just kind of a nuisance. You can max out your bond levels by completing these bond episodes, but also by giving these characters gifts. And it's pretty cool because when you're in the hideout, all of the gifts that you give them are displayed in their little section. And if you max out your bond with all your characters, your little hideout will have so much life and things to look at. And yes, you can max out your bond level with every single character so you won't have that special waifu or husbando. It's kind of a nice change of pace spending time with these characters in between phases, which is another word for missions. That's what they call it in Scarlet Nexus. But sometimes the bond episodes felt totally disconnected to the bigger story. For example, there might be a moment where your character dies in a phase, and then in between phases, you're in your hideout, and another character's like, oh, hey, let's go hang out and talk about my crush. It's like, well, shouldn't we be grieving and not talking about boys? Not only is it worth completing these bond episodes to get to know characters and wrap your head around the story, but it's also good for combat. Similar to games like Persona or Fire Emblem, bonding with these characters and increasing your bond level increases your battle efficiency with those characters. So you're connected to these characters through a system called SAS, Struggle Arms System, and here you can activate the character's psionic powers in battle. Each character's ability is mapped to the main buttons, and you can modify it to your liking. You can even upgrade your brain map, which is the skill tree, to activate multiple SAS powers at once. I loved applying the pyrokinetic, which is fire, or the electrokinetic, which is lightning, to my weapon, and then slowing down time with hyper velocity to maximize damage. There's so many different SAS combinations combinations, and they'll help the combat feel satisfying and refreshing. In the beginning of the game, you'll have a limited number of party members, which means you'll only get to activate a few SAS powers. But towards the end, you'll have so many powers to switch in between. It's really, really fun. And as you increase your bond with these characters, you can activate SAS for longer and unlock special attacks. Let's go through the different SAS abilities so you can get a sense of what kind of powers you can wield. So Yuito and Kasane have psychokinesis powers, and that's basically just throwing objects at an enemy's face. Kagero has invisibility, which helps you and your characters turn invisible. Arashi has hypervelocity, which slows down time. Kyoka has duplication, which is basically Kagebuchi no Jutsu. Shadow Clone Naruto, anyone? Okay. Shiden has electrokinesis, which is lightning. Hanabi has pyrokinesis, which is fire. And it's important to note that electrokinesis and pyrokinesis are the only two SAS abilities that apply elemental damage to your weapon. Sugumi has clairvoyance, where you can see through fog or invisibility, so would be pretty effective against Kagero. Luca has teleportation, so like instant transmission or shunpu, or basically just teleporting away during a dodge. And lastly, Gemma has sclerokinesis, which provides an invulnerable shield. All of these SAS abilities are temporary, but they do have a cooldown. Scarlet Nexus is just a reminder that using psychokinetic powers is extremely fun, in the same way that they were used in games like Control or even BioShock. And just in the way that SAS powers are limited, so is your psychokinesis. You do have an energy bar showing how much more of the ability you can use, so in between you'll definitely be hacking and slashing with your weapon. So all of these OSF members have psionic powers, but what makes Yuito and Kasane special is that they have other special abilities. Once Kasane and Yuito become more seasoned with their psychokinesis, they unlock an ability called Brain Drive, where they basically have shorter SAS cooldowns and psychokinesis requires less energy. They even unlock another ability called Brain Field, which provides unrestricted psychokinesis, and your regular attacks are a lot stronger. So you can hurl items at enemies forever in that Brain Field mode. But the problem is you can only use Brain Field for a limited amount of time before your character dies. And there are entire skill trees dedicated to upgrading your Brain Drive, your Brain Field, your SAS, and your melee attacks to make them more effective. I liked the combat pretty much the whole way through, but the only thing that annoyed me initially was the dodge roll. It just wasn't as responsive as I wanted it to be. But then later on I realized that I could just activate teleportation with Luca to avoid a lot of attacks, or equip a battle plugin to improve evade. My initial frustration with the combat was more to my lack of understanding the intricate combat systems in place. I felt like I was constantly on the floor due to different status effects like being wet or burned, and it took a really long time for you to get up. But as you go through the game, you do get a better understanding of the combat, you learn how to avoid getting hit by enemies, and more importantly, you can eventually equip some battle plugins that helps you avoid getting knocked down when you're hit with different status effects. Once I finally understood the full scope of the combat system, it was extremely satisfying to have the dance between hacking, slashing, dodging, throwing objects, and activating SAS. So as I mentioned before, throughout this game you're fighting enemies called others, and they look really, really weird. I guess if something looks weird and you don't know where it came from, you call it others? Is that better than aliens? I'm not sure. You do eventually fight other human characters that have SAS abilities, but you spend most of the time fighting these others. These others are super weird. Try and imagine a creature that looks like a horse slash tree with a water wheel as a face. Or imagine a bouquet of flowers wearing a corset and high heels. Yeah, it's that weird. And there is an explanation for the appearance of these others, but either way, I have to give Scarlet Nexus the credit for having a very eccentric enemy design. Each other has a brain hidden in various places, so you'll have to find the weakness of the enemy, hit it a bunch of times before you can perform an ability called Brain Crush, which is basically a one-hit kill. You crush their brain, they're dead. But some others are smarter and they have their weak points shielded, so you'll have to use hack and slash and SAS abilities or psychokinetic abilities on their shield, break their shield, attack their weak point, and expose their brain to perform a brain crush. And then there are others that are way more sophisticated and they have invulnerable shells. So you'll basically have to activate specific SAS abilities like Kagero's invincibility so that they don't see you, so that they get out of their shell and then you can attack them. And there are later bosses that are even more sophisticated than that, where you have to be really cognizant of what SAS abilities you have to use to exploit that enemy's weakness. But in efforts to avoid spoilers so that you guys can experience that shift for itself, I'm not going to say anything more. But the element of having to be cognizant of what SAS abilities you have to use to effectively attack the enemy is what makes this combat special and unique to other RPGs with hack and slash combat. In the beginning of the game, you can get away with just hacking and slashing enemies with your weapons and spamming whatever SAS abilities you want. But later on in the game, the others become more sophisticated and they become more like puzzles to be solved. So you have to really think about what SAS abilities will help you solve this enemy puzzle so that you could defeat it. And like everything else in this game, I was initially frustrated by that, but then once I started to understand it, it made me realize that this is what makes this combat so unique. So let's talk about side quests. Most RPGs fall into the camp of having a lot of grinding and a lot of fetch quests, and I was so glad that Scarlet Nexus did away with that. The side missions in Scarlet Nexus are simply defeating enemies in a specific kind of way, for example, using one character's specific SAS ability to defeat it. And you can tackle these through the main story. You don't really need to go out of your way to do a side quest. These side quests actually help me understand the combat a lot more and really hone into the different ways that I can attack specific enemies and get to know their weaknesses. These side quests do reward you with various battle items, upgrades, cosmetic accessories, or gifts for your party members. And the main menu conveniently includes a bestiary informing you of enemy locations and what items they drop. So for example, the side quest will say defeat 2 vase paws, which is an enemy name, while Hanabi's SAS ability is activated. You don't need to bring the character with you because you can activate these SAS abilities freely because they're happening in your brain, just like everything else in this game. So then you'll go into your bestiary and look to see where the vase paws are located, go to that location, and then activate Hanabi's SAS powers to defeat them. Pretty simple, and I like that you don't have to go out of your way. By the end of this game, I had so much money because I barely needed to buy anything because there's an exchange system. So how it works is that enemies drop various items that you can exchange at the merchant for battle items or for gifts for your party or whatever else you need. Truthfully, the only grinding I had to do in this game was completing the entire brain map, which is the skill tree required for the platinum, but once again, completely optional. I just don't really like when games that don't have endgame content don't allow you to fully upgrade all of your skills as you progress naturally through the game. Like, what use do I have of getting more skills after I beat the game twice already? It kind of doesn't make sense. Like, let me get all the skills either halfway or 3/4 into the game so I can enjoy the fruits of my labor instead of having all the cooler stuff when I'm already done with the game. So I made mention of many things in Scarlet Nexus that frustrated me or annoyed me in the beginning, but that later grew on me. It seems to be the theme of this review. But the one thing that stood out to me the minute I booted up the game is the damn soundtrack. It slaps. It's like an impressive variety of electronic music, rock, pop, mixed with turntable scratching and traditional Japanese flutes, and all of it fit pretty well into the tone of the game. Although there were like 1 or 2 locations that had super jazzy, funky music, but I was basically exploring like a rundown, abandoned, post-apocalyptic mall. But regardless, the music still slaps. The music was actually more effective in demonstrating this neopunk city than the actual environment was. The levels are all very linear, which I don't really mind, but none of them were particularly interesting to explore and they lacked a lot of detail. The environments kind of reminded me of how bland and linear Code Vein was. But what Code Vein did do well that Scarlet Nexus would have benefited from is adopting the cute little accessories that are available for Kasane, Yuito, and all of the OSF members in your party. You can buy or exchange to obtain various accessories like horns, bird tails, and bakis, which is a cute plush thing, aka a merch opportunity for Bandai Namco, as well as hair clips, backpacks, cat ears, and more. I didn't really find any of the alternative outfits or accessories to be really that cool. I just kind of stuck with the original set. The lack of cool accessories, in my opinion, didn't take away from the game at all. It was just supplemental stuff. But I recommend that you put a little Baki hair clip on Yuito and you will not regret it. So let's wrap things up here. If you're a fan of anime-styled action RPGs, you're going to adore the brain punk RPG elements in Scarlet Nexus. But if you're a little picky like me, I think it's still a good pickup. For the most part, I enjoyed learning more about Yuito, Kasane, and the other OSF members. I was so into this story that I was constantly questioning what caused this apocalyptic world and how the politics in this game played a role in addressing it. But just keep in mind that you'll spend more time in dialogue, getting to know characters, getting to know this world, than you will actually be in combat. Which is a shame because the combat is so good. So that's about it. I want to hear your thoughts on everything, literally everything in the comments. Please agree with me, disagree with me. Do you hate my reviews? Do you like my reviews? Any constructive criticism or feedback? I want it all. Did you play the game? Is this motivating you to play the game? Did this make you feel like, maybe this game is not for me? I want to know all the details in the comments. Like, I'm dead ass. I really want to know. So thank you so much for watching this review, and most importantly, take care of yourselves.